So hi, how's everybody doing? Hi, good, hi, good. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm actually an Ottawa native myself, so I always like coming back to Ottawa. Went to high school at Lisgar, just around the corner, and while I've been living in Toronto for the past 23 years or so, this will always be my home. And you can tell it is because yesterday I consumed an entire colonnade pizza by myself. So everyone here from Ottawa knows exactly what I'm talking about. I'm here today to talk about innovation and to talk about disruption. And it's a heady topic to talk about, and I recognize that it's something a lot of people in this room are probably thinking about a lot. So I'm going to cover a bunch of different things. First and foremost, though, as was mentioned, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of an agency called Diamond Marketing in Toronto. And what that means is I get to spend a lot of time talking to a lot of different people about their particular needs. And sometimes that's in the private sector, sometimes that's public sector, but mostly what it means is that I get to bring a whole bunch of knowledge, hopefully, to the table for a day like today, and talk about something about which I'm extremely passionate, which is innovation. So I'm here to talk about the disruptive economy and innovation and how things are changing and what's different and what's happening right now. But I'm just going to start by asking the room a question first and foremost, which is this. Who here is confused by the notion of innovation? Hands up. Hands up if you find innovation to be kind of a confusing thing to deal with these days. Who feels like they're hearing about innovation more than ever before? Hands up if you are. Who's reading the word innovation or innovate or something like it more than ever before? Who's writing it more than ever before? Who's writing it without necessarily knowing what it means exactly more than ever before? I'm one of those people. You know, you're not alone. This is a Google Ngram that shows you the number of mentions of the word innovation as a percentage of all of the words in the English language from 1945 until now. So you can see that we quite literally use the term innovation or innovating or innovative 5 times more often as a percentage of all of our words than we did just 70 years ago. We are more concerned with innovation and disruption and the impact this has on us than ever before, to the point that Wired magazine called innovation the most important and the most overused word in America. That's a very hard needle to thread, to be both incredibly important and incredibly overused at exactly the same time. So if you're feeling that this is a little confusing or hard to get behind, you are not alone. Innovation is absolutely everywhere. So we start to read about innovation, and you see articles like this one that say, we need an innovation strategy. And as soon as this article gets written, someone else is writing about how, well, here's what disruption really means. And then, of course, if we've had something written about innovation and something written about disruption, someone else is writing about innovative disruption, at which point someone else will be writing about disruptive innovation, at which point someone else will be writing about, someone else will be writing about disruption versus innovation and what the difference is between the two of them, at which point we get to this, the science behind Uberification. We're living in such a crazy time of innovation and disruption right now that people are actually using the word Uber to describe how we change things. So then we get to the Uberification of every industry, the Uberification of banking, and finally the Uberification of everything. If you find innovation and disruption difficult to understand right now, it's because the people behind innovation and disruption are making it as difficult to understand as possible. The innovation economy, the disruption economy, the Uber economy, the Uberization of everything. It's very difficult to keep up with, and so this is the reaction it produces in me. That's my Liz Lemon face whenever someone uses the phrase that an industry is ripe for disruption. Now, the reason I'm here to talk about this, though, is that we are seeing so much being disrupted, and I understand that as elected officials, that as public servants, that as people who are thinking about the way our world truly has to operate to best serve its citizens, this can cause massive problems for everyone. It feels like the world is changing very quickly, and I think sometimes for some of the people in this room, it may feel difficult to keep up with it all. So fundamentally, when we talk about innovation and disruption and the disruptive economy, we are talking about something called the fourth industrial revolution. where essentially what people are saying is that the world right now is changing as profoundly as it has during the last 3 industrial revolutions. When we went from being able to actually manufacture things, when we went from being able to power things, and now how things are finally changing, and that we're actually able to have a whole new kind of industrial revolution, one based around a digital economy, artificial intelligence, robotics, and everything else we're hearing about. That's this disruptive economy we're hearing about. But here's the thing that I would say. There is no real disruptive economy in any real sense. What there is what there has always been. There is constant innovation, and there is constant disruption, and because of that, there is economic change. In fact, I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is thinking that there are going to be entirely different rules in how we respond to something, or that we haven't seen this change before, or that, worst of all, if we figure out how we deal with this, there isn't some other form of change right around the corner. I worry when I hear about this brand new disruptive economy because I believe that the economy has been disrupted for my entire lifetime and our entire lifetimes and every time there's been an economic change before that. The only constant is change. So we have to get beyond this notion of a singular disruptive economy and recognize that change is normal, and what we're feeling now isn't change for the first time, but rather an accelerating speed of change and a greater need for innovation than ever before. So it's not that we weren't innovating. I would argue that the very first time we put a steam engine together may have been one of the single greatest innovations we've ever seen, or the time that first television got turned on, or when the first email got sent, which was decades ago, not even years ago. These were profound, disruptive innovations, but we're talking about it more now than ever before. We're saying that word now more than ever before. Innovation and disruption have never been as valued as they are right now, but that does not mean that we know how to get value from innovation. So, why is this so important right now? Why is everything so disruptive? Why does innovation matter so much? Why is it that we are talking about this more than ever before? Why, if this is something that's been relatively normal, is it at the forefront of everything we're talking about? And it's because I think we know that the stakes are higher than ever before. I think that what we are seeing and what we do understand on a very personal level is that if we don't innovate, we die. I didn't make this logo. In fact, if you search for the term innovate or die on the internet, you will find 250,000 different articles with that exact term in it. So this, obviously, is a Blockbuster logo. Everyone in the room remember Blockbuster Video? Just hands up if you remember wandering around one of them on a Friday night, spending a good 3 hours going to look for something that you and your friends could agree on watching. Who in the room remembers spending I think it was probably $2.99 or $3.99 on renting a video, is that correct? Who in the room remembers spending $19.99 on late fees because you had it for another 5 or 6 days? That was me. I'm like, did I really need to see Speed 2 7 times? No, I didn't. So Blockbuster at one point was the #1 name in home entertainment for pretty much the entire world, but certainly in North America. That membership card mattered to us. You would call ahead sometimes. Calling was something we used to do on phones. I'll explain that later. So you would call ahead sometimes to reserve the movie that you wanted so no one else could take it, because if there weren't enough physical copies of it, you couldn't actually watch it that weekend. And all of this seems as quaint as a telegram right now, doesn't it? So Blockbuster wasn't undone by some other video rental company. Blockbuster wasn't undone by a Jumbo Video or a Rogers Video or a what have you. Blockbuster was undone, as I think we all probably understand, by these guys, Netflix. Now, just hands up if you have a Netflix subscription. Sorry, hands up if you don't have a Netflix subscription. There's a couple people in the room. Did anyone in this room ever use a Canadian version of Netflix called zip.ca? Anyone? A few hands. Okay, this is interesting. So if your first engagement with Netflix was when they came to Canada, which it probably was, you have always had a subscription to Netflix that allowed you to watch things online. And whether you're getting that to your tablet or your laptop or desktop, or directly to your television, that's probably the Netflix experience for most of us. It wasn't initially available in Canada, but we had this alternative called zip.ca, and I'll explain what it was. It was DVDs through the mail. Netflix actually started as a subscription-based DVD service, meaning you would go online, you would create a list of the movies that you wanted to rent, they would send them to you in the mail, 3 at a time. When you were done with one of the DVDs, you'd put it in a self-addressed stamped envelope and send it back to Netflix, and then they would send you the next one in your Netflix queue. It actually took several years of Netflix being in existence before they sent their very first movie out to anyone exclusively over the internet. It was a bunch of people in a warehouse stuffing DVDs into envelopes, but for 10 or 15 bucks a month, that's how it worked. And in Canada, we had our own version, zip.ca. This company is maybe 15 years old, and I hold them up as an example of innovation because they started out as DVDs through the mail, which a scant decade and a half later couldn't seem less relevant or older if we tried. Of course, that innovation leads to other opportunities where now you get Netflix on your tablet, your phone, your laptop, your gaming system, whatever. Anyone in the room only watch Netflix on one device? Anyone watch it on 2, 3, 4? Anyone can't remember because you can now get it everywhere you want it, whenever you want it? Anyone with their head down watching it right now? It's all right if you are. Has anyone done that thing where you've watched an entire season of a TV show in a weekend and binge-watched the whole thing? And have you done that thing where it's like 2 in the morning and you're like, just one more episode? I did that with Breaking Bad, which I got onto a little bit later, and I was like, one more and I'm sure it's going to get better. The show's called Breaking Bad. It never got better. But that wasn't possible until we dealt with this kind of innovation. And what I love is that not only did they create their own economy, but they've actually managed to expand on it all this number of times. If I had told you 15 years ago that the people who were mailing you DVDs in the mail would win Oscars and Emmys and create their own original programming, you'd have told me I was crazy. But one kind of innovation leads to another kind of innovation, and it leads to these opportunities. I think this has always been the case, but I think why we're talking about this so much is that now we can see what happens if we don't. We're more fundamentally aware of the costs of not innovating than ever before. So one of the huge reasons we are seeing so much about innovation is we are aware of what happens when we don't innovate. The other is that there is a greater market for innovation than ever before, and it's being driven, like so much else, by these people. So first of all, I think it's amazing that I've gone 15 minutes in this speech, and it's the first time that I've mentioned millennials. That has to be some kind of a record for 2019. How old is a millennial? Like, just anyone have a guess? Age range? 30s? 40s? I heard 18? 27? So it doesn't really matter. I mean, these exact age ranges that we get hung up on, a millennial is supposed to be someone who was born somewhere between 1980 and 1996. So your average millennial right now is somewhere in that age range. A millennial should be somewhere between 22 and 40. Millennial just means adult under 40. And anyone out there who is saying to you that it matters if someone is 42 or if they're 20, and as a 20-year-old like a 22-year-old, they're close enough. I'm 46 myself, so I'm part of Gen X. Is there anyone in the room who actually is a millennial? Just hands up if you are. It's actually, rather than hands up just because we can't tell how many, just clap, please, if you're a millennial. Millennials, please give yourselves a round of applause. You're entitled to it. Least popular speech ever. I'm kidding. And actually, I've spent most of my working life paying more attention to this age cohort than any other, who I think are incredibly important, but also easy to make fun of. So let me have it both ways, millennials, today. It's Monday morning. We'll see what we're doing here. All right. So how big is this age group? Well, we'll have sort of some better census data, hopefully, in the future about this. But what we do know are a few things. One is that this is the largest generation in America. So there's the gray generation or the war generation. There are boomers. There's Generation X, my generation, millennials, and Generation Z, or Generation Z, depending on where you live. In America, Millennials are now the single biggest of all those cohorts. We'll see what happens in Canada. We think they've surpassed, but we do know for sure that they're the biggest generation in the Canadian workforce. We live a little longer than they do in the States, and we have slightly different family compositions, so our age cohorts don't exactly mirror theirs, but they're close. So I would guess that right now there are more millennials in Canada than there are any other age group. And I make fun of that notion of entitlement because it's easy, because everyone likes to make fun of millennials. But I actually like to lean into this notion of entitlement so that I can dispel it as a myth, because I think that's what it is. I don't actually think millennials think they're entitled to anything. I think millennials expect innovation and disruption in every single category. And when they can't get it, they know that they should be. And that feels like entitlement, but it's not. We talk about a disruptive economy. We talk about innovation and changing. We talk about how millennials are killing every single industry out there. They're killing the napkin industry. They're killing the golf industry. They're killing marmalade. They're killing gyms. I read an article yesterday that said millennials are killing mayonnaise. How do you kill mayonnaise? I've got a jar in my fridge from 1997. It's impossible to kill that stuff. They're not killing industries. They're not entitled to anything. They are a generation of digital natives who were born in an era, as we've seen, where innovation is valued more than ever before, and when we talk about innovation more than ever before, and when the possibilities of disruption exist more than ever before. I'm going to quote a guy named Jaron Lanier who said, "We already knew that kids learned computer technology more easily than adults. What we're seeing now is that they don't even need to be taught. It's as if children were waiting all these centuries for someone to invent their native language." I love that quote. How I wish I'd written that quote. So Jaron Lanier is a techno-cultural theorist who has been writing about this stuff for forever. This quote is from 1997. In the mid to late 90s, before the internet was really a thing for most of us, this gentleman understood that what was going to be different for this generation than for any other was that they were going to be born digital and have the ability to innovate or to disrupt or to expect innovation or disruption on their own terms more than any prior generation in history. And that is borne out by their digital nativity. Over 95% of young people and Canadians are on the internet every single day. 95% have some kind of a cell phone. 92% or more of those are smartphones. I work in marketing. I've spent a lot of time working in telco, and these numbers blow my mind because when I was growing up, it was about having a phone in my room. Do y'all remember that, a phone in your room? Feels practically Amish now, doesn't it, a phone in your room? Because it's now about a device on your pocket 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that lets you talk, text, chat, surf, whatever it is you want to do, that puts your world in the palm of your hands. Who here remembers getting their first cell phone? I do. And it was kind of a magical day. Like it was actually something really special when all of a sudden I was able to call anyone I wanted to, wherever I wanted to, however I wanted to, whenever I did. It was truly being untethered. And you now talk to young people who don't understand that at one point there were phones with cords on them. And that if you wanted privacy, you needed a really long cord and hopefully a closet right near the kitchen so that you could hop inside it and close the door and your siblings wouldn't be able to listen. So I grew up here in Ottawa, in New Edinburgh. Our attitude towards phones and how it changes is so weird. My family, we had 3 kids, my brother, my sister, myself. And as was the custom at the time, we had 2 phone lines. So there was one for parents and one for kids. And in the phone book, it actually had our address, my dad's name, and underneath it said children's line with our phone number. Like, here, bad people, let's just tell you there are children in the house and they have a phone number all of their own. This was normal 30 years ago. But innovation changes everything, and now we think about security and privacy with our kids' phones in a way that we just never used to. And that wasn't that long ago. So I realize I've been talking about innovation and disruption and this economy in very general, broad terms, but I do want to bring it back to some of the things that you guys have to think about more regularly. And I do understand this. Many of you represent municipalities that have had for the longest time revenue directly connected to home ownership in the form of property taxes. And that is changing. And I don't think that has anything to do with technology or digital nativity or disruption or anything of that nature. I think houses are getting much more expensive. Home ownership is getting much more expensive. I also think that you have a young person who is quote unquote settling down at a later age than ever before. So we hear a lot about how it is impossible for a millennial to own a home in this economy because of how expensive it is. I agree. Home prices are crazy, and that's going to have a huge impact. But we don't talk a lot about the fact that in the past 25 years, the average age of first marriage has increased by 5 years. The average age at which we have our first kid has also increased by 5 years. 25 years ago, you were 24 or 25 years old when you were getting married and having kids. Now you're 30 and that's happening. We are settling down later in life. We are living longer. We are owning our homes longer. These are massive societal trends that go far beyond just what's happening in a disruptive digital economy and fundamentally come back to some profound demographic trends that are having an impact on what everyone in this room has to deal with every day. So I'm going to focus on digital, I'm going to focus on innovation, I'm going to focus on this economy, but I just want to give a quick moment and say that I recognize that part of what makes your job so difficult is that you're dealing with massive societal forces and sometimes having to think about how that affects a town of 1,000, 2,000, or 10,000 people, much less a larger municipality than that. There's a lot of disruption in the economy. I think there's an even greater amount of disruption in our population these days, and that's what we're dealing with. All that being said, I talked about millennials. I talked about how they can make anything happen. I talked about digital nativity. And now I'm going to talk about this. Everyone recognize this logo? It's Napster. So who here used Napster when it was around? I'm not a police officer. You can just put your hands up, guys. Everyone's fine. So again, just applause if you use Napster. And then extreme sadness if you remember the day it went down. So Napster, for those of you who don't know, was a peer-to-peer music sharing service. Essentially what Napster allowed you to do is to open up whatever your music file was on your computer and allow anyone else in the world to look through the contents of your music file and download a copy of whatever song they wanted to, and you would do the same with them. They called this peer-to-peer. Now, an MP3 is a digital music file, and it's about 4 megs in size versus a file on a CD, which would be a lot larger. So one of the things that happened with Napster at just the right time was the internet wasn't so robust, and we could download an MP3 in a reasonable amount of time. It was a small enough, compressed enough digital file that it worked. You heard a lot about Napster at the time because you'll notice there's one thing missing in it, and that's any kind of economic model. Right? Napster was quite literally people just sharing their music or stealing music if you worked for the record industry at the time. But I want to bring up something about innovation and the way it has an impact on the economy. Napster came out in 1999. This little device, one or two of you may have heard of, came out in 2001. And that's that first iPod slogan, 1,000 songs in your pocket. 1,000 songs would now be a really terrible iPod, by the way, so things changed really fast in just under 20 years. Anyone remember buying one of the first iPods? What was it, $600, $700, $800 for one of these things? Black and white screen, that fun little touch wheel. You were supposed to be able to load it up with 1,000 songs. You spent hundreds of dollars on it, and you know what didn't exist? iTunes. Apple was selling you an iPod with the promise of 1,000 songs in your pocket, but there was no actual way to buy music online that you could load up with it. You were literally buying this thing, and then you were going and buying CDs, and then you were putting CDs in your computer, and you were digitizing or compressing the files on them and loading them on the iPod yourself. Napster wasn't a reaction to music being too expensive, I don't think, although we were spending an awful lot of money for a 15-song CD that had maybe 3 good tracks on it. Thanks very much, Britney Spears. Oops, I did it again. But in fact was a reaction to being promised one thing and not being able to get it in another. When we talk about this notion of innovation and disruption and millennials, we're talking about a generation who learned how to build the things that they wanted, that were promised to them, that they could not get. And now we sort of look back on this time fondly, right? Back in my day, you had to use Napster to download music. Now stuff just streams right to you. Who in the room uses a streaming service like Spotify or Apple Music? Who in the room is still buying CDs? Anyone in the room still renting DVDs? Also, how? So I've been making versions of a speech like this for a long time, and the past 5 or 6 years are really interesting in that 5 years ago, half of the room would have put their hands up and said, I'm still buying music somehow. And now we don't. And that disruption didn't come from top down. It came from bottom up. The very notion of this very innovative or very disruptive economy that we're seeing is being constantly disrupted because millennials know what is possible and will make things change. And truthfully, this is a generation that has more of an impact on their parents than any other previous generation. Anyone with kids at home? Hands up. Anyone ever played video games with their kids? So that never happened when I was younger. My father was not following me to an arcade to play Pac-Man. In fact, middle-aged men who hung out in arcades were kind of creepy now that I think about it. If one approached you, you're supposed to yell stranger danger and go running off. But now we actually help our parents get more innovative. Our parents actually look to younger people and say, what are they doing, and are interested. I started seeing this phenomenon a while ago where for Christmas, kids would get a newer version of a piece of technology and they would give the older version back to their parents. It started happening in the mid-2000s where like you were going to get an iPod Nano and you were going to give your first iPod back to your mom or dad and load it up with songs for them. We called this hand-me-ups. But I do think there is something interesting about innovation and disruption now, where boomers are actually wired for innovation by young people. So, again, hands up, please, if you have kids at home, or just kids, period. Hands up if they have a mobile device. And keep your hands up if when you want to hear from them very quickly, you text them. And put your hand back up if you call them. Because you're usually texting them, but you call them so infrequently that they know that if you've called, something serious is happening, right? I talk to an awful lot of parents who say the first text message they ever sent was to one of their kids. And then you start texting everybody else. I talk to tons of parents who are on social media for the first time ever because of their kids. My dad joined Facebook not because he wanted to join Facebook, but because my sister had kids. And he wanted pictures of his granddaughters. And she said, I can send you some, or like another billion people on the planet, you can get online and see that there are currently 375,000 photos of each of your granddaughters on Facebook. Just go and look. And so now he's stayed on Facebook, and he has a robust social network of 27 friends. Periodically, I think he puts a Google search accidentally into his status update. Like it just says hemorrhoid cream with a period at the end of it. And anyway, if we're talking about innovation and disruption and why it's happening and why this economy feels like it's so changing, I would argue again that change is constant and change is always there, but what we are noticing are two very specific things. That we are living in an era of high stakes, because we know that without innovation we perish, and an era of high appetite, driven by millennials. And anytime those two things come together, well, it's now. It's right now. And so what does this mean for everyone here? Well, I think it can be really, really, really difficult sometimes to think about innovation and disruption and what we do with it, because it feels so much like we should have been reacting to this 20 years ago. And that's not wrong. But I'm reminded of a quote that I really, really enjoy, which is, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So understanding that we all can't go back in time and plant those trees 20 years ago, we have to think about how we're reacting to innovation and disruption and planting our innovation tree right now. And so I'm going to end this with some big rules for innovation that I think everyone in the room can think of and can follow and will hopefully help react to this very changing, disruptive, or this feeling, very changing, disruptive, innovative economy right now. But there are some big rules of innovation that I think are important to follow. So here's the big ones. And the first is this. Innovation is iteration. So I've talked a lot about the nature of disruption and a disruptive economy. And I get that the words are sometimes synonymous, innovation and disruption, but I will say this, disruption really seems to imply to everyone some massive, huge change that we couldn't possibly see coming. And I say that is sometimes the case, but rarely. Most innovation is actually iteration. It is small, meaningful changes that happen over time. And they're actually easier to predict than we think and easier to react to than we think if we are looking for them. So we'll talk back to Apple because there's such an easy example to get to. So hands up if you had an iPhone 1, a 2, a 3, a 3C, a 3S, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 6C, a 6S, a 7, a 7 plus, 7 minus, just kidding, there was no 7 minus. Who had an 8? Who had a 9? Kidding, no 9. Who has a 10, which I call an X? So hands up if you have had 3 or more iPhones in your life. So that is what I mean by iteration. Apple's not a massively successful company because they innovated. They did that once with that first iPhone, which changed the game. But they're a massively successful organization because they have iterated that iPhone, truthfully, 20 or 25 times in the past 15 years or so, 12 years or so. That is what I mean by innovation being iteration. Small, meaningful changes over time until finally you get to this, the tallest iPhone ever. It actually looks like a remote control I would have grown up with, I think, now that I think about it. But that's the biggest misconception about Apple or any one of those other massive tech giants who seem to be profiting and doing so well in this very disruptive or feeling disruptive economy. That they are innovative. On a month-to-month basis, they are not. They are iterative, which, as they say here, is a fancy way of saying they are good at making steady, small improvements over time. So innovation, for most of us, is iteration. I'm going to repeat that. Innovation for most of us is iteration. I think a lot about Uber as an example of an industry that a player in an industry that we can all follow. And I want to just mention, Uber is about 11 years old. It started in San Francisco in 2008, and as an idea in 2008. Not in San Francisco, in fact. It started allegedly on a New Year's night in Paris when the two founders of Uber couldn't get a cab and wondered why they couldn't with all of these empty cars on the streets. And that's the legend. I don't know if it's the actual story. It took Uber well over 5 years to get to 100 cities. And I feel for a lot of our industries that have been affected by Uber. It's not just a taxi industry that's been affected by it. It's the way that we commute to and from work every day, how people use cars, all of these things. The gig economy, we've read so much about this. I know that this is an incredibly significant thing, but this shouldn't have taken anyone by surprise, right? Uber actually started out as a private car service using exclusively town cars and limos that at the time were being undriven while they were idle, waiting for their next passenger. And those particular cars were actually the ones that were hanging out being idle all the time. Uber's first slogan was everyone's private driver. And the idea was that you would get someone who was normally driving around someone on a corporate account or an expense account who then had this car and it was going unused and Uber would let you use it. It took them years before they actually truly disrupted the taxi industry by getting everyone who wanted to drive to be an Uber driver and leading to what we're calling this gig economy. It didn't happen overnight. We can see this coming. We can make sense of iteration in our economy and deal with it. But I would say that that means that government in particular has to learn to iterate quickly. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges facing everyone in this room, if not the biggest challenge in this room. I have an extraordinary amount of respect for people in public service. My father actually ran for office federally in 1972 in Ottawa East, believe it or not, for the Tories. So at the height of Trudeau-mania, my father ran for the Conservatives in Ottawa in 1972. Good work, Dad. He's fine, everybody, he's fine. And I've grown up surrounded by public servants my entire life because my dad did in fact work for the government for most of his life, and my mother in fact worked for external affairs for a great deal of hers as well. So I remember being fascinated by public service and being impressed by public service and loving that we always got taken onto the roof of one of the extra buildings near Parliament to see the fireworks. That part was really cool when I was like 6 years old or so. And I grew up across the street from some fairly famous people in politics right now, and I unfortunately also did university debating. So again, I was surrounded by politicians or future politicians my entire life. I get that this is a challenge, but speed of iteration is different than disruption, and learning to iterate quickly is the single most important thing our government has to do. Our governments, period, have to do. It doesn't feel to me like we can keep up with the speed of change, with the pace of change, unless we ourselves learn to change as quickly. So things that spend an extra few weeks going to committee are more of a problem now than they've ever been before. Having to get extra levels of bureaucracy on side are more of a problem than they've ever been before. And I do think where this really matters is there is a responsiveness to the public that is critical as ever, and we do have the tools to engage with them more quickly than ever before. But this economy that feels so disruptive is actually a constantly moving series of iterations, and we have to learn to iterate quickly. That's rule number one. Rule number two is that innovation, like absolutely everything else, is people. And this is where I come back to millennials. An awful lot has been written about how entrepreneurial this group is, and we can actually track this kind of stuff, do massive research studies over time that talk about how truly entrepreneurial this generation of Canadians, this generation of North Americans, this generation of young people, period. And I will say both from personal experience and an understanding of quantifiable research that this is the most entrepreneurial generation we have ever seen. It's a group of young people who have grown up with a device in their hands that has let them feel that they can do whatever they want to, whenever they want to do. There is a reason why so many of these unbelievable, massive companies that never existed before, categories that never existed before, were started by millennials. But that may not be helpful if you're looking to engage them in public service. So I want to remind everybody in this room that entrepreneurs can actually also be intrapreneurs. That it is possible to create environments in either public or private organizations that treat young people as if they have a corner of this for themselves. Promoting entrepreneurialism, but inside your four walls, and calling it intrapreneurialism is, I think, a really neat shift, and you can read a ton about this if you just Google this term. But innovation is fundamentally people, so I think learning to engage those people is really important. And attracting and retaining and engaging the best and brightest matters more than ever before. I don't want to get into anyone's specific politics in the room. I'm super nervous over this next slide, so please bear with me because I'm using it just as an illustrative point. I understand how charged everything right now is, but he says, putting a picture of this gentleman up there, I will say one thing about this government, which is they actually managed to do a terrific job of outreach towards young people. And I loved this notion of opportunities for young Canadians. And I get really nervous when I talk to engaged, impassioned young people who seem to want to change the world and fundamentally don't believe they can do it by working in public service. I think we have to flip that script and make sure that young Canadians, specifically for this room, young Ontarians, but heck, let's have people come to this province if they want to, need to understand that you can achieve so much by working in public service, that there are opportunities. But I don't think that's going to happen unless we follow that first rule and learn to iterate quickly. Money may be an issue, engagement may be an issue, attraction and retention may be an issue, but when I talk to young people, the one thing they think about more than anything else is purpose. And purpose needs proof. So they want to know that they can accomplish something, and that they are doing something, and that they can see the results of what they are doing. I truly believe that the best way to deal with this constant sense of youth-driven change is by employing and retaining the best and brightest young people out there, but they are going to want to know that the work that they are doing has purpose and results. And we need to let them know that public service is where that happens. All right, 3, and this is really important, is that innovation fundamentally focuses on the end user. So I will say we can't be reactive to what we see as a disruptive economy. Rather, we need to focus on why the economy is being disrupted and what's happening. I'm going to use an example everyone will understand in the room, I think. Everybody remember these guys? Kodak? The #1 name in picture taking for the longest time. I read somewhere that developing traditional film uses a minute quantity of silver. And that Kodak was such an enormous player in the film industry that they were the #1 user of silver in the world for something like 2 decades running. This was how we took photos. So who in the room had an actual camera that took film? Who remembers taking photos and then getting them developed 2 weeks later just to find out that most of your friends were doing this? Does anyone remember the first time they went to a 1-hour photo place and got their photos developed all that quickly? And it felt like it was coming back so fast? An hour? Could you imagine now waiting an hour to see the result of a photo? Like a 13-year-old's head would explode. It's like take that selfie and just hold that pose for 60 minutes. How long can you do duck lips for anyway? I don't know. So Kodak would have told you that the most innovative and best pictures you could possibly take were with Kodak film, no matter how long it took for them to develop. And Polaroid, their competition, would have told you, well, in fact, the best pictures you could take were a Polaroid. And forget an hour, this one would develop in only like 2 minutes. And they would have said that they were incredibly innovative. And you would imagine that if one was doing well, the other might do badly, or vice versa. But in fact, both of these venerable, long-standing picture brands started to die at exactly the same time. Kodak would tell you that the best camera is the one that takes the clearest, sharpest pictures. Polaroid would have told you that the best camera is the one that allows you to develop a physical picture right away. But we all know that it's different. The best camera is the one that you have with you. So hands up if you do not have a camera on you right now. It means you don't have a phone. Who's taken pictures in this room of screens today? Hands up, please. Who's already taken a selfie with someone since they've been here? Hands up, please. Who's taken a photo of the food they've had either yesterday or today? You're a part of the problem. Stop doing that. I've got to ask you on behalf of everybody, stop doing that. This is what I mean by innovation being focused on the end user. It's really easy to think of the thing that we make or the things that we do about being our organizational purpose, but it's actually the response that it creates in that end user that is really the focus of innovation. Kodak and Polaroid weren't undone by each other or other camera companies. They were undone by the fact that now your phone has a camera in it, your iPad has a camera in it, and you can share these photos with your entire network as quickly and instantly as you possibly want to. So innovation focuses on that end user. So, this leads me to a quote from Ramiz Nam from Singularity University a couple years ago. And he said, people are doing what companies used to do, and companies are doing what government used to do. And this is maybe the single most terrifying quote I've ever seen at a tech conference, and there have been lots of them. I don't think he's wrong. And I think that notion of focusing on the end user is something really interesting because companies are able to appeal to that, and people are also able to build their own music sharing services if they want to, or create their own social networking systems if they want to. And so I think there absolutely needs to be a greater role for government in innovation. I like it when I hear that a federal government has an innovation strategy with money devoted to it, because I think that's the only way we properly react to this disruptive economy. But I think that if that doesn't find a way to trickle down to everyone in this room, it's a huge problem. And that's because I think innovation actually fundamentally can come from anywhere. And I mean that almost literally, in that some of the best examples of how innovation functions are almost accidental and truly coming from anywhere. This is Building 20 at MIT, and I just love this story. Post-World War II, or just at the end of the war, the US government had to find a place to put all of these scientists they had hired to work on the war effort. And so they all went to work at MIT, but there wasn't actual buildings for them. There wasn't infrastructure. So they built this hastily assembled aluminum sheet building called Building 20 and just shoved everybody there. And the amount of stuff that came out of this building, advancements in radar and sonar, microwaves, video game controllers, Chomsky linguistics, everything came out of this building because innovative people were forced to engage with other innovative people from outside of their practice area. So I don't believe that innovation has to just be confined to big cities or bigger municipalities. I think anyone can be innovative anywhere as long as we're getting exposed to other points of view from our own and making sure that we are working with purpose to build something. I love Building 20 as an example because it proves this, that innovation can absolutely come from anywhere. That being said, I think it also means that we need some kind of better public-private collaboration to deal with this disruptive economy. Again, I don't want to get super political about anything, but I live in Toronto where Sidewalk Labs is all the talk about everything and this bold vision for Toronto. And I actually don't know if it's a yay or a nay, and I imagine if there's 1,000 people in this room, there's 1,000 different opinions. What I'm more concerned about is how diametrically opposed the two sides seem to be, as if there can't be some kind of answer of public-private collaboration that figures out what to do with cities. I'm not sure that the answer in every municipality or every town is going to look like the same thing, but I do think for sure that there has to be some better collaboration, and it is really polarized where I live right now, and that's the part that makes me worry. Because I think this, innovation isn't a reaction. I think it's action. I think if we react to what's going on rather than taking a leadership position, it's going to be problematic for us, especially as municipal leaders in this room. We need to better lead the economy, not follow it. And that's, I think, the last thing that I want to end with, which is this. Innovation needs funding, period. And so whatever needs to happen for the leaders in this room to receive the proper funding that they need to deal with a very disruptive economy of innovation, I think matters as well. When I talk about public-private collaboration, part of it, and I think I'm not alone in this, comes from the fact that that's where it seems to be a lot of the money is. But I also understand that if we were dependent on things like property taxes for our revenues and people are just buying fewer houses, that's going to have an impact as well. I think job one in dealing with innovation and disruption and how things are changing is recognizing that every great story I told today about every great organization was fundamentally well-funded, and government needs to be innovated, and so government needs to be well-funded to manage that innovation. Sure. Look, I'm telling a group of government officials, you all should have more money to do what you want to. I expect a round of applause, but I'm extremely serious about this. And that's the last message that I want to end with, which is this. Innovation isn't a goal. It needs to be a process. It needs to be a habit. None of us in this room are in the innovation business. I mean, I may be, out of anyone in this room. But you're in the business of serving a public trust and doing right by your citizens. Your goal isn't to be innovative. Your process and your habit is to be innovative. And to properly do that, to respond to a more innovative citizen than ever before with greater expectations than ever before, means having the tools of innovation at your disposal. So it needs to be well-funded, and it needs to be purposeful, and that's why innovation fundamentally has to be a habit that leads to your other results, not your goal. Make innovation your habit and not your goal, and that's how we will get there. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge and enthusiasm with us this morning. Delegates, please join the exhibitors for a coffee break in the exhibit hall. We'll return here in approximately 30 minutes. Thank you.